Surprise, it's me. So happy to be here with you all. It's been a while. We'd love for you to turn on your camera if it's something that you're able and willing to do today so that we can see your beautiful smiles. And of course, we always love it when you type in the chat and let us know who you are and where you are today so that we can continue to connect and build this circle and community that we are blessed to connect to every week. Hello, Lisa, Katrina, and Susan, and Nancy. Hi, everyone. Hi, Rita. Miss you all. Hello and welcome to APPPAH Live, Exploring Birth Psychology. Today is Monday, June 19th, 2023. I'm Catherine Lightfoot, the Executive Director for APPPAH, Association for Prenatal and Perinatal Psychology and Health, and I'll be your guest host for today, filling in for Wendy. APPPAH Live is our weekly webinar series, bringing you the experts and pioneers in the field of prenatal and perinatal psychology that inform and inspire an expanding awareness of conscious babies. APPPAH Live is free and open to all who join us live on Mondays at noon Eastern. And if you are new, this is your first time visiting us, we are so happy that you're here. Welcome. And of course, we welcome everyone in this growing, expanding community. We are a member-supported organization, and we love to give back to our members with lots of yummy membership benefits, such as the recordings of our APPPAH Live webinars are available as a membership benefit to APPPAH Premier members. You can explore all of our membership options and benefits by visiting birthpsychology.com/membership. And Stephanie can share the link with you in the chat. You can click on it and just save it to view later. There are a couple of exciting things we have going on at APPPAH I'd like to share with you. It's not too late to join the Journey Through Parenting course, which begins this week on June 21st. This course is designed not only for parents, but also for providers and educators. And again, we'll post that registration link into the chat if you'd like to view more information and sign up for this wonderful 5-module course. And I really hope that you're making plans to attend our 23rd International Congress in October. This year, we are exploring the science of nurture and celebrating APPPAH's 40th anniversary. Your registration ticket will allow you to choose if you want to attend in person with us in Denver, Colorado, or virtually. All of our main Congress sessions will be live streamed for virtual attendees, and all the recordings plus 10 virtual presentations will be available for all attendees, in person and virtual, to view at your leisure for 6 months. So you won't miss anything. You can grab your early bird discount for the next 2 weeks. So view the full agenda and the ticket prices at birthpsychology.com/Congress. Before we begin our time today, let's take a moment together to ground by opening up to your breath and maybe gently closing your eyes if that feels good. And just be present to the breath as it flows through your body in this moment. And allow yourself to be present to your needs today as we begin our session. And allow yourself to be present to your shifting and changing needs as we move through our time together today. Today, we are honored to share time with Valerie Montgomery to hear her perspectives on how prenatal and perinatal trauma can show up in adulthood. Valerie is a licensed professional counselor in private practice in Colorado, as well as an educator and guide. She's the lone survivor of triplets and a placenta previa. She shares the honor of holding space for her own and others' personal healing journeys. If you have any questions during the presentation today, please type them into the chat, and we will get to as many questions as we have time for. Welcome to APPA Live, Valerie. So happy that you're here.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it so much. APPA's been very meaningful to me ever since I realized that I was a triplet and started on my healing journey 19 years ago. So I thought today I was hoping we could have conversation, talk about stories, and be able to integrate more about our own realities, if that's okay with everyone. So I wanted to start out with my parents' perspective of my pregnancy and my birth. My mother was from rural Alabama, living in Miami, Florida. I was the second pregnancy. My older sister was, well, we're less than 2 years apart, so she was really young. And they were excited to have a second child. And about 6 months along, there was excessive bleeding, and the doctor put my mother on bed rest. My father was a teacher. They were both public educators, and he was working. So he was half Cuban. He brought one of his cousins, I think, Carmen, to the United States from Cuba to take care of my mother and my older sister. Now, Carmen didn't know any English, and my mother didn't know any Spanish, and she's on bed rest. I came early. She called me Skeeter Bug because I was thin and looked like a mosquito. I know. The story was that when I was born, my mother was hemorrhaging, and the doctor came out to my father in the waiting area. This was 1963 in Baptist Hospital in Miami, Florida, USA, and said, "We don't know what to do. The bleeding won't stop." So my father got on his knees and prayed. And the next thing he knows, the doctor came out and said, "We don't know what happened. The bleeding stopped." My mother said when I was a newborn, I would nurse, but never wanted to be cuddled. As soon as I finished eating, I wanted to be put back in my crib, or I would start crying. That's an interesting attachment piece. I sort of became my mother's emotional caregiver. That's the way I see it. Now, I know that there are other people who will not see it that way, and if any of them are on this live or watch this later, this is my perspective. So I hope that would be respected. And so I grew up. I always knew I wanted to become a counselor or go to counseling. You know, I've done both. And so I really could sit with people in really deep spaces. At 8 years old, I was listening to a neighbor who had babysitting kids, and he was one of the babysitting kids. And I risked getting in trouble. In fact, I got in trouble because my mother couldn't find me on the city block in Miami, Florida. And I was listening to Kevin talk about his parents' divorce and his ear pinning back surgery. So I was always meant to be a listener. And I don't stay in the surface areas of cognitive and behavioral, although I utilize that to get somebody in a stability space and life resourced potential. But then I want to know, where did the trauma or pain or the belief or definition originate? So I grew up, I became a military spouse, a community volunteer. I was a stay-at-home mom for 20 years, went to graduate school. After graduate school for counseling, I went to be trained in developmental trauma. So from 2008 until I learned about my own womb triplet loss, I didn't know that there was the research and the experience of helping people before they were born. And so I was doing developmental trauma work. I was trained out of the Meadows in Wickenburg, Arizona with Pia Melody. And I was able to start to notice some deeper functioning of the trauma work in the body. And then I went into a PhD program, and that's where I met Barry and Janae Weinhold. They told me about APPPAH. And then I did 2 rounds of workshops with William Emerson in Dallas. And I've been working on myself for 19 years. I really feel like my work has been instrumental in being able to hold space for others to do their deep work. I want to tell you a story later about a client who came to me, and they have signed a release. But right now, what I found was being a womb triplet survivor comes with certain experiences. And I feel that it can explain a lot for people when you can't understand what is it in this person's deep soma, we say, the body, that is holding something that they can't understand or they can't communicate. So today might go really deep for some of you. And I want to say that I like to make sure that this is safe. And Catherine has already made us do a centering or a stabilizing experience. And so I would, before I shift into my experience from my own birth that I have found through my own work and into the stories of one client's work with me, I want to just say that this can be triggering in effect, like if someone is on this call who doesn't understand how important your own prenatal experiences and your own perinatal experiences, my story can be, we would say destabilizing, but you might find yourself like breathing more or sweating or like having racing thoughts, or you want to get up and walk around. I just want you to know that some of this can be acutely, it can get into your body in a way that you're not prepared for. So I want to let you know that this is a deep topic. So what I've told you until now is the cognitive piece. And so I would like to, if you feel ready, to tell the story from the baby's perspective, and that's me. And Janae Weinhold would say, I can see your baby. So I did some training with her. And at this point, if anybody has any questions, is there anything in the chat, Catherine, that anybody would like to ask about before I transition to the baby's perspective?
I don't see any questions posted yet, so let's dive in.
Okay, so before we do that, I just would like you to have water, something that might be soft. It could be your pet on your lap, or it could be a scent that you enjoy. So, so basically, okay, so here's what I think happened. I found in my work with various types of providers, so cranial sacral embryology therapists I've worked with. I've worked with my own biosequencing chiropractor who's found stuck places in my body of definitions or beliefs about myself that were created, and in our case, at 3 months gestation. At 3 months gestation is when I believe my triplets had to leave. And you probably see I'm already getting emotional. That's what tells me it's true. My mother has already left the planet physically, and she didn't know this. So I don't take this lightly, this information. And that's one of the reasons that I want to be very careful about how I share it. But my triplets couldn't stay. Now, I did work with William Emerson, and I was out in the, what does he call that? Before you get into the body. And I was out there and I had my triplets by the hand and I said, come on, let's go. It'll be fun. And I am the middle one of my triplets. And I'm also the middle of two living sisters. Now, of course, they're different ages. And so I was enthusiastic to come, but my triplets needed to leave about 3 months. By the time I was doing this work, my mother was already in advanced dementia. But she did tell me that she did bleed at about 3 months along. So I believe that's when my triplets were leaving. And so, and then, you know, from the family story, the parents' story, that 6 months she was put on bed rest. And I believe she was my mother was kind of a worrier. And so I believe she pulled on my adrenal glands while I was in utero, not because she wanted to, but because she was so scared of losing my pregnancy or losing me. And so it really, I believe that when I was born, and I don't know how early I was, I did see a question come across in the chat, but like I was early, but I never found what my due date was. In fact, my mother was disoriented because of the blood loss that she had to redo my birth certificate. She thought I was born the day before, but I wasn't. And so I kind of had this experience of feeling like on a metal tray somewhere in the room while they were trying to save my mother. Now, you know, my mother was unconscious. I know with my older sister, she had a saddle block or something for the birth back in the day. And my craniosacral embryology therapist says that she could smell off-gassing of anesthesia in the room when I was doing my work. And so I believe there was anesthesia used. I don't know how that worked with her being unconscious, but I believe spiritually I called my mother back and would not let her leave. So I'd already been in, you know, like a womb that wasn't safe. There's an experience that I have of going to the top of a ski slope in Colorado. It was about the time I learned about this phenomenon, and I was at the top and it was a little too steep for me, but I remember being mortified and afterwards processing it to where I felt like I was going to leave the womb at the bottom of that run. So I was up in the top of the womb trying not to leave like my triplet sisters. There are so many things that I believe we have as people that we don't realize is our birth trying to talk to us, or our prenatal experiences trying to talk to us. And I believe that at my birth, when I spiritually called my mother back, that set up a reverse emotional support. So guess who I work with now? I work with women. I have a lot of experience in being an emotional supporter for my mother, who, you know, had fears. And in fact, when she got pregnant with my younger sister, she cried and she was worried it would be like my pregnancy. So y'all, I'm not really supposed to be here. I don't know. I feel like I'm here to hold space and to be living life in a holistic sense, enjoying everything I see, hear, smell, taste, touch, and feel. And so that's my experience. And it's really something that is a sacred story, but I feel like if I can share my sacred story, other people can understand more about themselves. So yes. Any questions at that point? I just went on and on.
At any time during the presentation, if a question pops up for you, you're welcome to type it into the chat and I will keep track of those. Susan Highsmith is sharing right now with you, Valerie. Thank you for sharing your story. I acknowledge your prenatal experiences and commend you for your courage. My perception is that you are supposed to be here because you are here.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. And I do want to share a poem at the end that came out not long after I realized. But you see, my poetry isn't cognitive. So the poem came out and then I realized what it meant. Yes. So if you all are okay, I would like to transition to what that shows up like in my work. Okay. So I mentioned the developmental trauma training piece that I have, that I was practicing. I did 2 years after the training of supervision with the originator of the developmental trauma model. That is the basis of all the treatment programs at the Meadows. And so it was only natural that I would come to find out about my own triplet loss. And that was through a counselor, actually, through a model of counseling called Splankna. It's a Christian protocol, and it uses thought field therapy, neuroemotive techniques. I might say these things too fast. And EMDR, or eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. I'm not trained in Splankna, although later on I did get trained in eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. But what it really helped me with is like priming the pump of the developmental trauma until I was ready to access the prenatal and perinatal trauma pieces for my clients. And so I started noticing some things coming up. Some of my clients had times that they would be nonverbal in their tears. And I do a breath work exercise and teach them to do that, to access what the body is holding as their truth, and to release the emotional freeze that happens on the nervous system when something happens that we don't know what to do with, and none of our caregivers know what to do with. Things happen all the time where we're not sure what's going on, and maybe later we have the time and the bandwidth to process that in a way where we feel safe. And so anytime, you know how APPPAH has the world, and the birth is the world, the woman's pregnancy is the world, and it's basically, I tell my clients when they're ready for it, your first 40 weeks, from when you didn't physically exist until you could breathe on your own, is kind of important. And they go, oh. And then, what was your birth like for you? What was your birth like for your family? Were they expecting you? Were they actually like welcoming? Was your mother cared for? Was your father and mother cared for in a community? Were there resources? And so I teach the attachment model, where, you know, the mother and the baby, and as long as there's, you know, plenty of attunement and presence and regulation, the baby gets to rest and digest and enjoy that mirroring that encourages the baby to exist from the mother's gaze, or another parent, or a community member. And so my clients go, oh, you know, but it's all only when they're ready for that. So I also notice in my adult clients when there's a topic related to transportation. So here's where I want to share the story of my client who's given me permission. This client came to me a few years ago with a gastrointestinal situation, and also transportation. Some people might call it a phobia, getting on an airplane, or has to be the one driving in the vehicle. And I always clue into the vehicle, right? Because our first world is the womb. And we're actually, that's our first home. And our mother's our first vehicle. So I was cluing into that. It takes some time to get an adult ready for this type of depth work, and the developmental trauma, the breath work that I do with when someone can tolerate that, when they're ready for it, can start to give an access to their body. And I use emotions. I say that emotions are a portal to timeless healing in the body. And we never know what's going to come up in that case. And so this was a very interactive, relational client. And they really were interested in the relationship, first of all. And there was some reciprocity of sharing that was needed for this client to be able to feel joined in their process. And I believe in my work that they open like the energetic space of their own self to include me while we're in session. And then at the end, they retract that back and they take it with them. So I'm part of an energy field of support that is for the moments when we're meeting. And they take their process throughout the time between meetings as well. And so this client started to realize there were times that they didn't feel like completely relaxed in their original home, that there was some almost hyperactivity, or like, I want to say over functioning, but some people just need to go all day. But that was not this client, but that was their parents. And there had been some less financial resources early on in the family's development. So that could have made the parents extra busy, if you will, and having the model of the child needing to be busy, to keep them out of trouble. But this client really needed a lot of space and time to breathe and process and make decisions for what was right for them. And so in the period of the first 18 years, there were several instances where I would do inner child work, if you will, in an imagery work setting or training that I do to access where this adult who's with me can reparent their inner child. And I'm there as the facilitator. And so eventually I would ask these questions. Well, okay, so there's also the gastrointestinal piece. Don't forget, I mentioned that. So rest and digest is a sign of secure attachment. What if there wasn't security for that infant or that prenatal being? And so what I learned from all the work that we've done together through time, is that the mother was almost close to having a stroke. Her blood pressure was so dangerous that they had to turn off the lights when they removed this person from their mother. Before the full pregnancy, but to save the life of the mother and my client. So my client was removed from the mother for at least 3 days. And this is a big wound for this adult client. And to realize this. And so there was a lot of dysregulation, we would say. They weren't feeling that safety. They were feeling, where is my home? Where is my mother? And they did have their father, but everyone was really, like in my birth, concerned about the mother. Apparently, they weren't concerned that I was going to not live. But in this case with my client, they were concerned, mother or baby. And so my client has learned how to breathe, to access those deep areas, and to realize that they don't need to go too fast in their world. They need to make sure they're not working a 40-hour work week with the drive it, like our culture sometimes in the US anyway, thinks that, oh, we've got a badge of honor because we're busy. that's not for this client. And it's really not for me either. And so there was some emotional somatic freeze that needed to release off the body and off the nervous system through tears, shivers, breath work, yawns, all of the things. I pay deep attention to my clients, and this is where I go deep. This is where I find where are the roots and how far back does this go? So yes, I think I will stop there and see if there are any questions.
Thank you, Valerie. Just know that we're all here in holding space for all of these sacred stories that you're sharing. Vicki is asking us to know more about the piece of the story that showed you that you were the middle twin. And she says she also wonders if you know about whether there was any identical twinship happening or if you were all fraternal.
You know, there was a curandera I worked with. So a spiritual guide who was actually a counselor. So I thought, this person is from indigenous culture in Middle America, Central America, I should say. And so I went to her because she had both the spiritual side. So she'd come and done clearing at my house. There was some things that I knew her from in the community. And I thought, well, maybe she can help me with some of these things. And so she's like, I can see them, they're here with you and they look like you. Now, they're the same age as you and they're always with you. So I think they're identical and I have named them. And in fact, my backyard, when I moved into this house 2 years ago, I named the 2 trees in my backyard. They are my triplets. And so, and that's another, see, this tells me this feels true to my body. And you know what? Our minds make up all these, oh, that can't be right. How do you prove it? Our minds are sometimes errant, but our bodies, I believe, are truthful. And so that's how I think. So it was a curandera who saw them and told me they're with me all the time. They have different personalities from me, she said. And yes, so I think that answers that question.
Vicki says, I completely support you in the validity of your story. I often, when I get those emotions too, you know, I call them truth bumps. It's that time where you just know in your inside of you that
it's so valuable to feel in a safe enough space to feel your feelings and what has been around for all this time. And, you know, I have some training in epigenetic trauma too. But at this point, I'm sticking with my own prenatal and the prenatal and perinatal work that I do in my counseling business. And I will validate people's stories all day long, you know. So it's lovely to hear that back. So thank you. Any other questions?
That's all that's come in right now. We're all just, I think, in awe of your vulnerability and your ability to share this with us. Thank you.
You're welcome. I do wanted to say that I have a special calling, I guess, to work with adults to help them find. None of my clients who came with me realized they had birth or prenatal trauma. And so it's not like I can advertise, hey, you got some prenatal trauma, come and work with me. It's more like, hey, you feeling stuck? Are you feeling like there's some things you haven't been able to move through? Do you need support in a deep way that isn't what you've already had? So I work with people a lot who have worked with other counselors. In fact, I ask that before they come to my clinical work. I ask them if they've had counseling before, because starting from zero takes a lot of time. So I usually work with someone who's had counseling before. So I did see a question come through. Can we get to that one?
Yes, Kathy's asking, do you have a sense of why your triplets left?
So in my work with my chiropractor who does biosequencing, so it's structural, physiological, and emotional. And she says emotions are the basis of health, with the physiological and structural on either side. What we got from my body was that they were sick. And that's what a 3-month gestational baby might decide. That's what it is. That's, I don't know any more than that. Yes. So I think maybe what I will do now,
Here's another one if you're ready.
Oh yeah, I
Okay.
love questions.
It's I hope I'm saying this right. Jai is asking about epigenetic healing. Can you let us know a little bit more about that?
Yes. So epigenetics is the study of how genes turn on or off based on circumstances. And I have this realization that my mother came from poverty. She was from the most rural county in Alabama. And so I have a fear of poverty that I came upon very honestly. And I think that's what, in my work, I take off any pressure of blame from anybody. It's really about understanding. And I work with adults, so they can do this healing work. Yes, we do want to understand what happens, but a blame model doesn't help for healing. It keeps that almost dependency on what happened, right? But I want them to heal. And so epigenetic trauma goes back, they've traced it 14 generations, although I think there's no limit. But modern science, they have to have the quantitative. I'm more of a qualitative person, a heuristic kind of a teacher model person, especially in my work. And so epigenetic can be it's a very deep, sometimes not known, but I'll say, okay, well, what was it like for your grandparents? Oh, well, they were first generation Americans. They came after war. They immigrated. Okay, immigration is a trauma. When it's something you didn't choose, when it's something you had to flee. And so there's all these things. It's really useful to do. Counselors do a genogram. I've done genograms with my clients where you find out, okay, this is you, this is your siblings, this is your parents, this is your grandparents. And this can go back, especially in stories about your families. What is the history? Where did you find who you are? What did you find as the most stabilizing force? Was it your mother? Was it your father? Was it your siblings, a neighbor, a grandparent? I've had people who've come through my office who with severe trauma, like event trauma. I work a lot with, prenatal, perinatal, developmental, and epigenetic trauma, but there's event trauma that happens to adults and to children. But I think it's really subtle, these things that you can't put your finger on sometimes, these patterns, or it's almost a context. My father was institutionalized during his childhood, during the Great Depression in New York City. He was put into the orphanage at age 9, and he aged out at 18. Orphan. His mother was alive, but his father had died at age 5. So that cut off the whole access to my Cuban side of my family because my father never learned Spanish. And how could he? His mother was German. They lived in New York. It's just understanding some of what we've honestly inherited. It's not, there's no blame involved. Let's just understand, is this living in our bodies? And what makes the most sense for me to, I call it metabolize it. And in my work, I use emotions and tears or yawns, or I get feedback on where they're feeling it in their body. I teach them to spelunk in their body. They go spelunking, right? so that they can understand. I use a lot of metaphors, if you can't tell, to help people understand these unseen things that there may be parents and grandparents didn't know to share or didn't know how to share.
Are you ready for another
Is there a
question?
question? Okay.
Yes. There's some comments too, and I will send all the chat to you afterwards so you can read them at your leisure.
Great, thank you.
And Melinda would like to know what personal practices support you to stay present.
That's a really great question, Linda. For one, I set my own schedule. I'm now working from home. I have my cat nearby, beautiful trees, bushes. I can water my plants. Right before this, I went out. I was telling Catherine, I went out and watered my plants. I have a journaling practice that I do when I feel it's the right thing for me to do. I enjoy getting together with friends and having coffee, or they come over and we have a long, good, deep chat. I do read, and I do this thing called process painting, where I just paint whatever I want, however I want to, with whatever means and whatever color I feel like. So it's very validating for my body.
That's wonderful. I love creativity as a mode of grounding and healing and transforming experiences. I'm glad that you do too.
Yes.
Lisa wants to know if you have any children and how your story affected your own pregnancy, if so.
Yes, I have 3 children. This is kind of interesting. Good question. 2 of whom were military births. So my firstborn was born at Fitzsimmons Army Medical Center in Aurora, Colorado. And it was a teaching hospital. And we had only gone active duty 3 weeks before, and she was born. I mean, she was a week overdue, supposedly, right? But like, she was due on the 22nd, and he went active duty October 3rd. So we had just gotten to Colorado. I had no idea to drink a lot of water. Nobody told me that. Oh my gosh. And so I had her, they did a radical episiotomy. They did forceps. And I was scared. No, I didn't. I mean, I took a class in Lamaze, right? But like, I was in a new state, in a military facility. And this is one of the ways that you can know that my story is okay for people to learn from, because I had a class come in and watch the birth. I allowed a class to come in because I wanted them to get some experience. That's my education value. And so, but it was really hard. She was born a week, well, when she was ready. But we'd also gotten to this new state. It was dry here. I didn't understand that rocks could be beautiful on the ground. You know, I was from the Southeast with rain and greenery. And then the second one was born at the Air Force Academy here in Colorado Springs, and he was a brow birth. And I finally had my civilian baby, third baby. And that was where, they stayed with you, the baby stays with you in the room and all of that. So how did that affect? I never really thought of how my experience as a baby affected my birthing, but boy, those first 2 were not very smooth. Getting stuck in the throat, do you notice that? I noticed those things. You guys are really smart. So I hope that my children are interested. They don't really ask me about any of this stuff. So I really, I think my daughter does tell me that she's happy of the work that I'm doing, that she's glad that I'm growing and changing. It has been hard for her because I've changed a lot of myself, and from how I was reared to what I'm choosing now. And so I'm really proud of all the work I've done.
Absolutely. I'm glad you're proud of you. Do you want to take some time to share with us about what you do and how people might find you out in the world?
Oh, yes. I am making sure we leave time for the poem at the end. But
Mhm.
basically, so I have my clinical practice. It's virtual for people who live in Colorado. I do, in the last couple of years, I've been putting together a second business that's education and holistic guideship. And it's basically a way for me I've launched a couple of courses. I was telling Catherine before we got on that the process poetry course might be good for anyone who's had, maybe they have their counselor already. They also might want to process in their body when they feel safe enough, and they have the resources to keep themselves safe, to be able to do that deep splunking in their body. So the process poetry course is on both of my websites. Is that clinical, and then I have my education one. And so I believe I saw the link tree going in. I am on social media because education is a value of mine. And clinical counselors aren't really supposed to be, interacting with clients online. So I've done it all like the things that I share are things that people can actually make use of right now. They don't need my time to learn from what I've put out there. I've been learning Canva, like I'm just trying to put out some things that people can find hope, because emotions are the portal that I found in my work to healing. There's always hope because we can heal those things that might have never had a witness or have never been validated or accessible until there's a certain amount of life that we've lived.
Wonderful. I wonder if you find, like I have, that sometimes just seeing and having the awareness of what is happening or has happened is the portal also to that transformation. And the
Yes,
emotions show us that. They show us those things.
that's right. It's really unique to each person what is most helpful to them. And there's so many options of how to heal. And I've mentioned a couple or some, I've done counseling and training and experience in my own, like counseling, psychotherapy lane. But I've also sought a lot of support outside of that for other allied professionals who have helped me a lot. In fact, I interviewed my cranial sacral therapist, and it's on my YouTube channel. So she's precious.
Hmm. Well, is this a good time to share your poem?
Yes. So I wanted to tell everybody before I read this, I did read it at an open mic, and I was just like this, like tears. And it's been a few years. I wrote this in July of 2018. And I want to just give a caveat that in advance of this, life can teach us things. And that's like I was alone with my journal. And this is what came out. I did write something after it that I may or may not share, but I probably will share it. But I reread it this morning and I almost cried. So we'll see. But just know I know you all are friendly to crying. So I appreciate that so much. Okay, so take a minute and just be resourced, be in your safety zone. Okay, you might want to look down. You might want to make sure you're breathing. Hold something that's soft or yeah. Okay, I said this is part one, and I'm going to read it how I wrote it. So it's not going to be like a sentence. Crying out with lonely tonight. Counselor, friend, both cancel. So it's bison chili, I don't eat. Popcorn and Malbec for dinner. Salad slaw marinating. Queer eye are my friends. Longing. Heart cry. Friends. Understanding and knowing. Me, in my vulnerability, raw and needy. I keep to myself, though that's okay. I don't need to fix this. Just feel it. A lifetime. Spending time with myself all day. Clients don't count. A pediatrician stopped by, an opening, a person, an invitation. Sometimes the lonely wins. Part 2. Let me just slink back to the shadows. The hiding feels safe, invisible, familiar. God, I hate how comfortable this feels, like it's home. To be seen means to be gone. To be seen equals annihilation, obliteration, ceasing. I fight so hard against it. Fighting against it equals survival. And that I did. And really still do. Complacency equals death. Do I think they were complacent? Or my survival is because of the fight? The fight defines me somehow. I need other, and yet that's a crutch, a hiding all its own. Desperate to not be alone and craving the others, depriving of nutrients. You can have it. I want you to have it. Stay. Please have my share. Really, it's okay. I don't need it. You have it. Anyone is better than no one. I made an abridged comment here. I think it is of note that I have struggled with anorexia throughout my life, that my triplets left about 3 months into our pregnancy, that my mother was put on bed rest at 6 months gestation as she had placenta previa, that she nicknamed me Skeeter Bug at my birth as I was so thin.
Breathing with you.
Thank you so much for listening and for letting me share the overlap between my story, a client's story, my work, and what I'm still birthing.
So happy to be here and witness to your story.
How's everyone doing?
How y'all feeling? I'm seeing some drinks and some thumbs up. Yeah, everyone seems to be resourcing them.
Nice.
Hugs and hearts all
Lovely.
being shared with you.
Yay. Any questions? Anything that's
We did have another question, Valerie. I wonder if you're open. We've got a few more
Yes.
minutes left in the session.
Yes.
I don't have a name for this person, but they're asking, what kind of body work have you found to be most helpful for dealing with pre and perinatal trauma?
Well, so interesting. I think, I've watched some William Emerson's DVDs that I got of how he worked with babies. And also my own breath work is about training for finding where the body is trying to tell us something. So it's breath work that I learned from Pia Melody from the Meadows in Wickenburg, Arizona, Treatment and Healing Center. And also my craniosacral, I call her embryology therapist because I recreated my birth on her table during craniosacral therapy. And so she's a local craniosacral therapist. She's fabulous. And that was really important. And like I mentioned, my chiropractor who's trained in biosequencing, that a chiropractor in Northern Colorado created, I understand. So my chiropractor does muscle response testing to find what my body wants to heal next. It could be emotional, structural, physiological, although every time I go, she makes sure I'm in alignment. But she also believes that emotions are the basis for health. And I'm sure, the curandera I mentioned, spirituality, having my trees in my backyard. So there's a lot to it. Prayer, staying present as much as possible. I do have a tendency, I can dissociate pretty easily. I say that because my father made long prayers and my mother was worried about the food getting cold on the dinner table. So I had to leave because I couldn't stand it. But there was probably other times too. We had to sit in church and not rock the theater seating that we were sitting in. And we had to sit through the whole sermon. So, and not write or draw. So there's a lot of these things, that my body has, I've learned. So hopefully any of that might be an answer to that question.
Mm-hmm. Yes. May we all find our stories and our path to healing in whatever way it may arise. Thank you for being such a wonderful model for us and sharing your authenticity.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Mm-hmm. And thank you all for being here with us and witness today. We hope to see you again and again and again in APPA Live, as well as in some of our other courses in the halls of APPA, the virtual halls. Next week, we'll round out the month with a presentation from Christine Poulin on the power of hypnosis for birth. Please feel free to unmute yourselves as you offer your blessings today. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.